well, I'm just going to set you up as a permanent presenter so I can add you whenever you like. Who's the green screen in the corner?
That's me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you look like you're
you're in an alternate dimension, I believe. So
yeah.
You know how I
all the
switch
my sights on.
Yeah, there's something covering your camera or something.
No, I have two cameras, and trust me, you don't want me
Oh,
to present from that angle, so I'm trying to switch it. Do you know how I switch it?
Wow, you look so imposing, like, hello.
Yeah. Hello. Any ideas?
What browser are you using? Because
Chrome.
I think it's a browser setting. All right, so in Chrome, do you see a little camera somewhere in the address bar, not in the actual software?
Oh, hey, Kat, while we're sorting out this messiness and everybody's waiting for us to start the show, you have a fan. I was in Orlando and I had some people walk to me and say, "Oh, we watch your show all the time. This is really great." And that girl that you couldn't say her name right.
Oh God. Okay, well,
and you're like, yeah. When is she coming back? Seriously, no kidding. They actually asked when you're coming back. So if I'd known you would have been today, I would have told them today.
Well,
but
is Katya the name? Katya, is that Scandinavian or Ukrainian? Russian. I'm sorry. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry. My mistake.
Her name is much prettier than the way I was saying it. Believe me. Now that I know, it's like, okay, but she's still just gonna be Kat. That's all.
Once I had heard you said your own name wrong, Lauren, I refrained from any further thoughts.
That's right.
I'm pretty good about bad names. If Ed was here, he would tell you how wonderfully bad I do butcher people's names. I'm like, you remember that guy such and such? And like, what did you call him? Anyway, everyone, thank you very much for joining, and thanks for joining and testing out live for our first time on our new platform. As you can see, we can have 6, but we can have actually up to 10 talking heads. Whoops. And I thought I had no disturb on, but anyway. So with that in mind, Robert disappeared. Where'd Robert go?
It's kind of interesting how we're all shifting.
Yeah, it moves on priority of when you join, I think. I think it's a matter of when you join. Your big screen in the middle. Oh, so we all have control at the top as to how we display the screens. If you look at the top tab for presentation, it'll change according to how we want to set it up and configure layout-wise and so forth. So, Robert, quit pushing buttons.
Exactly.
Stuart prematurely start the show, and Robert's changing the format. Come on. All right, let's officially start. Welcome, everyone, to the Hospitality Marketing Show number 226. With me is Mr. Stuart Butler with Fuel Travel, Ms. Stephanie Smith with Cogwheel Marketing, Kat Muhammad with, well, it's just Kat, and with Al Hoa. She's the Director of Education for Al Hoa, and Mr. Robert Cole with Rock Cheetah. Since we got off to a kind of a bumpy start, where would you like to start, Mr. Roberts, since you are the curator of the list of news? Or is there a topic, Kat, that brought you in, or Stephanie, that you wanted to make sure we didn't miss today?
I only provide the topics. I do not pick them.
I think there's only one place we can really start, given the news this week with Expedia, don't you?
That was a pretty big bombshell, I think, for a lot of people.
And honestly, I think that the reason behind it was that the board of Expedia listened to Tim Peters' Things Out Loud podcast, because the last episode was all about Expedia and the trouble that they're in, and could they save themselves? And then literally a couple of days later, we hear the news that the hammer dropped. So Nostradamus Tim, once again predicted what was going to happen.
See, I thought we were going to hit on the Uber first, but that's okay. All right, we can.
Well, that's the rut row. That's going to be at the end.
That's got to be last, Lauren.
Yeah,
it is some structure.
Yeah, well, okay, true. Since proper structure to it.
Yeah. So, although this is kind of a rut row too.
So what do you think this is going to mean? What do you think the impact is going to be for this?
Well, Expedia's share price is going to go up because they're going to buy back like 20% of their shares or something like that, or they can, which has nothing to do with their operation at all. But
let's go back one step. What happened? Let's just start. What happened with Expedia?
Yes, Barry Diller, who's the chairman of Expedia, and really the person responsible for creating Expedia once it came out of Microsoft. So Barry had his IAC companies, and he's had a variety of organizations. He actually bought Hotel Reservations Network first, I believe. Dave Littman and Bob Diener's company, which is kind of the merchant model business, and then he wound up doing Expedia, acquiring Expedia, and then putting them together. And Expedia, I think, had acquired Travelscape by that time. So anyway, Diller was kind of the architect who put all that stuff together. But he's been chairman for 20 some years, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then Mark Åkerström was the CEO who had replaced Dara Khosrowshahi, and with that, Mark was the previous CFO, so he became CEO. And then I can't remember the name of the current CFO, but Barry decided, apparently rather suddenly, or the board decided that Mark and the CFO had to go because they were not growing the business fast enough, and Barry thinks they can grow rapidly next year. And so strategic difference of opinion, which resulted in the CEO and CFO both getting canned with no replacement named. So rather sudden and dramatic.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in those meetings. I'm sure they got pretty heated. And if there's a big difference in strategy or direction or vision that led to this kind of a move, it had to be significant. And on the back of some really poor performance as well. The last quarter earnings looked pretty terrible and, missed their forecast. The shares, and Barry Diller said this, that their shares, they feel are very significantly undervalued right now, considering what the revenue is that they create and the potential growth. But I don't know. I had a text conversation with Tim this week after this happened, and we were just kind of back and forth trying to figure out, well, where does Expedia go from here? What is their differentiator? Because they're in this situation now where the majority of their customers, i.e. the hotels, really don't like them that much and are trying everything they can to reduce their reliance on Expedia. And then you've got their main source of business or their supplier being Google, who's doing everything they can to disintermediate them and try to get deeper in the value chain themselves, so Expedia becomes less relevant. It's like, where do they turn from here? What's the pivot that needs to happen to generate the kind of growth that Barry Diller's talking about? I don't see a clear and obvious answer other than maybe a major merger or an acquisition. They've certainly got to get further into the value chain. They've certainly got to get a bigger share of wallet, try to find other ways to monetize travel other than the commission that they're getting right now from hotels and such. Because again, 70% of their revenue right now is hotel based. They're still doing the airlines and the car rentals and whatnot, but it's 70% is hotels. So where do they go from here? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it may even be higher. I think it's really like when you start looking at some indirect thing, I think it's more like 75 and even maybe more. It generates a lot of their business. Yeah, and I don't know. It's an interesting challenge, and I don't know what Barry. Barry's not a stupid guy. I don't know what he has up his sleeve, because one is he's not going to go to. You look at other forms of travel products. Air. There's no chance with NDC in one order, the airlines are not going to suddenly, line up and say, hey, how can we do this? Hotels are performing at historically high ADRs and occupancies. So he's not going to get a big
and they have saturation already. It's not like there's a lot of hotels that aren't using them, right?
Right. So
there's no real growth opportunity there. Yeah. Vacation rentals, they bought HomeAway and they've kind of dabble in that.
Blew it by changing the name to Vrbo, right? HomeAway was a much better name, but again, all these two-sided markets, right? You have the supply side and the demand side. They made that change for the supply side because HomeAway really was getting in a bad state because they were changing the model from a subscription, kind of a flat subscription model to a transaction model, which increased the cost to the supply base dramatically. So they didn't like that. So they went with Vrbo, which was kind of better liked, but a much worse consumer brand, which again is completely the opposite of what Expedia has done in the past. They've always acquired everything that Expedia has been acquired demand. Right? They acquired what's now hotels.com. They acquired Orbitz. They acquired Travelocity. Everything else. I don't know.
Yeah. They've got options, right? But I don't think any of them really is a home run. And I don't think any of them, a lot of them, maybe they can't even pull off. But do they make an acquisition of something like TripAdvisor to try to get further into that, the
not
ecosystem?
TripAdvisor is going to get acquired by Trip.com.
Trip.com's
invested $300 million into it. The names make sense.
Yep. So then,
Um,
what else
yeah.
do they partner with someone like Amazon and try to solve Amazon's problem of travel? I don't see
That's
something like
already
that happening.
that was Amazon Travel version 1.0. That
Yeah.
didn't work because sharing
Right.
didn't generate sufficient margins for Amazon and didn't really. I mean, that would be a great thing for Expedia, but
For sure, but
Amazon's
I don't
not
know
going
if
to
the
get. They're going
upside
to
is there
want
for
a
Amazon.
lion's share of
So
the.
probably unlikely, right? Now, do they feel like there's confidence that they can grow revenue in the packaging side, like the the experience? Because seems like everyone's trying to get into that area. There's an article today in the list about Booking.com trying to get more and more into
Mhm.
how we add things to do.
The
with
connected
package.
traveler.
Yeah. The connected travel. I don't see that being a massive opportunity in the next 12 months, right? So
No.
at least not from a revenue growth standpoint. So because it's so splintered, it's going to be so challenging because you got to work with each individual location and deal with all these vendors, and that's a longer term play.
Well,
So
and the play like with Marriott, that's a tiny proportion of packaging. I mean,
yeah,
the hotels are not a strong opportunity. Now the airlines have much better opportunities, but they're broken. American Airlines, AA Vacations uses Switchfly. They have their own technology. My prediction is that they're going to go very heavy toward NDC and one order and try to figure out how they can monetize that, which is great for American. United and Southwest are tied up with Apple Leisure Group, right? So that's good managing their stuff. Delta has what used to be MLT Vacations they brought in house. That's okay. JetBlue's pretty small. I mean, none of these guys are huge. Southwest has a pretty robust, robust business, much more robust than the others. But
there's nothing there.
Expedia's not going to pick those,
right? So then, do they look at getting more into the the operational side of the hotel so that they can get more touch points with the guest? And they've already got software. They've with the HomeAway acquisition, they bought some PMSs for the vacation rental space. So they've got that. Do they make
lower
that
margin businesses? That's good.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's not their MO, right? But
Right.
I mean, their MO isn't working. So maybe they do look at these lower opportunities and get into the software B2B kind of side. I doubt it.
Now is like a ripe time for some type of a disruptor. They're at a point of needing to rebrand, honestly. From the hotelier side, Expedia is the main OTA that is avoided, and with direct booking campaigns increasing across the board, whenever we hear dissatisfaction, Expedia is always number one. So with the model they currently have going, it looks as though they will be losing business if they continue trying to do the same thing. So with this transition, it looks like their shares actually went up once the announcement was made. So now that they have this platform of open ears, folks are on their toes, waiting to see what's the next move. So it is a perfect opportunity if they are going to make a drastic change and attempt to be a disruptor. Now might be it, and it may not be staying in the economy side of things. Maybe it's going more into private flights and things for the echelon, or a completely different model, because the economy side is pretty fairly covered in other OTAs.
And I don't see them. That requires investment spending, potential risk, possibly lower margins, and those are not the recipe for what Barry's looking for.
Right.
He said the opportunities to expand margin and grow the business, right?
That's in the short term, like next year is what he said. But at the same time, though, the not a coincidence that they're authorizing more share buybacks at the same time. And like you said, they're going to have increase it. I mean, are they going to eventually try to go back private, because then the pressure of Wall Street is off them and it frees them up to do other stuff? I don't think they've got the capital to do that. So, but like, why are they buying back so many shares right now? What is
just to boost it's low.
Well, boost one of the price, right? But
they got
something beyond that.
Wall Street unfairly treated them with the last bounce because of the Google stuff. I was doing some research. If you look, some really astounding numbers. TripAdvisor gets about 77% of their traffic through organic search, which is a huge proportion,
Mhm.
right? For Google, and they lost 30% of their share value, right? When it kind of came out that Google's, shifting a lot of it to their own
Yeah.
the traffic, their own product. That's fine. Expedia Travelocity orbits, right? Which all kind of function pretty similarly. That's 31 to 35% between the three of them. Actually, Expedia is at the lower end, right? It's 31%. I think Orbitz or Travelocity was more at 35. Hotels.com, though, only 22% is organic, and Hotwires only 16, which is pretty interesting. So hotels being the hotel-oriented brand is not nearly as dependent on organic search as as certainly TripAdvisor. What's interesting, Booking.com about 20%, right? Priceline 18, Hotwire 16, right? So you kind of go, wait, those guys are in fairly good shape. Yes, Google Flights is doing a bunch of stuff, so maybe there's an issue on the flight side and being able to pass through and cross-sell to hotels, but that's kind of a second stage. The really interesting stat that I saw, Hilton and Marriott are 31 and 35% reliant on organic search. So you start looking at this and going, wait a second. They're in worse position from Google taking this stuff directly. And you can go, oh, okay, well, those, some of the hotels are still saying Google is a direct booking. And you're like, that's not a direct booking, guys. You're just fooling yourself. So you're more reliant. You're 50% more reliant on Google and organic search than hotels.com is and booking.com. That's not a good situation.
Yeah.
So,
But there's some nuance to those numbers, though, right?
Yeah.
Because just looking at them on their own doesn't tell the full story, because Expedia, I would imagine, is spending a lot more. Spending $4 billion a year just on Google ads.
Well, between Booking and Expedia, it's well over 10 billion, right? It may
right.
get
Okay.
closer
So
to,
let's split it, right?
Let's
say
say
it's
11, something like that. Yeah.
Right. Say $5.5 billion each that they're spending. So that obviously skews the organic numbers. And I would say something like Hotels.com. Just the nature of its domain probably gets a lot of direct type-in traffic that the bypass.
I don't know. SimilarWeb breaks that down into paid search, though.
They
break it down into paid. So that's a
Hilton
separate category.
Does your Hilton and Marriott numbers break it down into like branded searches versus non-branded, like people that are specifically looking for Hilton and Marriott or specific hotels? Because I feel like that's a high majority of their organic traffic as well. So
yeah.
Well, if you read the article by Larry Mogilewski, what they should do is they should cancel all of their bidding on Google AdWords to see what the real
everybody
impact
out.
is. between paid and
Larry.
organic.
Yeah, as I said, sometimes I throw in articles that I may not agree with.
I know
Theoretically, he's not wrong. It would give you a very clear idea of how paid is working versus organic. But
Absolutely.
I'm not necessarily the most drastic solution.
I want to be on a plane with Larry and say, Larry, let's do the test that you talked about. Let's shut the engines off and see if we're still flying, and then just let us know, okay?
Actually, those those planes, even these large planes, they have a very long glide path. For the weight and mass, they glide really well.
That's the physics of lift. Let's do
Larry
it in a helicopter instead.
I'd be very green if we could just get all of the planes to coast instead of running their engines. We'd reduce emissions by
a lot. The green, same thing with green plane. But no, Larry is, I think, to keep. In some ways, he tends to be more of a shock jock on some of his comments these days. Where I don't know, because he's been writing for so long, I think he probably feels like there's nothing else to do other than shock people. Like, hey, let's turn off the lights and see what happens. It's like,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because he specifically said it's been several years since he's been in hotel marketing,
and it shows, right?
Because his original evaluation of what hotel marketing is putting ads in newspapers.
Right.
That was the definition of hotel marketing.
Yeah. Larry has been around since, gosh, Robert and him got together at the Manger and started selling rooms that night. But
no, actually, when I was at Four Seasons corporate office back in the late '80s, Larry, I think, was in hotel marketing then. So that's probably the time frame that he's talking about. And some things have changed, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, I do think like it's interesting because back then marketing was much more, I think, regionalized. We didn't have the accessibility that we have today to reach people from really all around the world. And so that, I think, is a piece of the article that was really missed, is that there is a totally different tactic that you need to take when you're looking at international travel, when you're looking at even travel from the other side of the US, compared to in the 80s. A lot of people didn't have that kind of discretionary travel spend, but now travel's become more of a human right, I think, with the millennial and the Gen Z generations. And so it's really interesting to see the prioritization that they have on travel.
Some of the big things would do back then, you'd take your Amex co-op money and you could go buy Wall Street Journal ads and things like that, right?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And actually Liberty GoGo Travel, I don't think they do it anymore, but they always, for decades, bought the last page of the New York Times Sunday travel section, right? And that was a big deal, right? I don't know, maybe they still do.
Well, just put it in pragmatic terms. There was a time where you could go to American Express and buy lookalike audiences for people using their credit card at your location, but it was
very effective.
$50,000. Now we can go on Facebook and do it for free.
Yep.
With a lot more accuracy than what they were offering.
Quite honestly, the Hotelligence product, which was created by Sabre and then given to TravelClick, but actually before TravelClick was even called TravelClick, which was not a good strategic move by Sabre whatsoever. But that product was based on basically competitive sets that American Express, developed for the credit card processing, right? It was, and I know because I developed it. It was based, or that was the essence of it was, hey, you can do this with payment processing. Wouldn't it be better with transaction processing and some forward-looking booking thing? That would be really interesting, right? So, different times.
It seems like he's.
Or you could buy. One that I'm sure Stuart is still very big on is like National Yellow Pages advertising, where you can really get it focused by market. And would you want to get the display ad in that portion of the Yellow Pages in that market or not?
Remember the hotel
very
book?
big thing for fuel travel.
Hotel book. If you weren't in the hotel book, you weren't a hotel.
No. That was Hotel and Travel Index. And again, Melinda Bush, who is still around, that was my first. I got a Hotel and Travel Index scholarship in college to get an internship with Four Seasons. That was my foot. I didn't blow the internship, and they offered me a job. So,
my favorite marketing ploy, which is still in effect today with, a lot of hotels, is much more simple. It's very cost effective. If you build it, they will come. So, we still see that in use today.
Well, actually, Stuart's also a very strong proponent of fax marketing. That's really another one of the pillars of fuel travel.
Very important.
Yeah.
Yep. Fax, Yellow Pages, billboard.
Sandwich boards outside. Is the other one we're really hot on as well.
My favorite response to that is that, I don't have fax because of where I live. Because I live in the 21st century.
Nice.
There are still in the merchant model traditional tour operators, right? There are still groups that are sending faxes that are, and for a number of things. One is for credit card authorizations,
right?
Which is just insane. That should have been killed 18 years ago. But.
Although
still doing that, and for rate and for inventory updates, rate changes, things are still happening by fax. Amazingly,
we get faxes on a probably weekly basis from local restaurants with their blue plate special or whatever, and it's the ROI is high for them because if I go eat at a restaurant, I eat a lot, and I'm going to go back there a lot. So that it's live and kicking fax marketing.
We did have a large client fax us back a contract just about a year ago, and we were really, really surprised. And so was their supervisor. But anyway, it happened.
Yeah, I
Uh.
saying I had a government contract which ended actually probably about a year ago, but with some very, very secure type requirement. Security requirements were very tough, and it used to be burn CDs and FedEx them sort of thing, or fax. But the irony of fax is so many people now have like e-fax and things like that. You go, do not do that. That's really bad. That's the worst. So not.
I want to
not
make sure that
good.
we don't miss this topic you put in there because it has a larger conversation to it. And the topic that you put into it was the abandonment rate. We finally hit 90% on abandonment because all of us work in different aspects of our industry. And for me, the market differences between the abandonment rate in New York versus the abandonment rate, say, in Vancouver or Dallas, is profoundly different. It's almost like there's a strategy of how people book in certain cities. I mean, in New York, unabashedly, there's usually around 80% of bookings that come through that get that get canceled. And then you have to go through the whole process of even validating the bookings by using the popping the card for a buck just to make sure that it's a legit booking and not some ghost booking. So the article itself is interesting that it's actually statistically that high. But really, I'd love to have a conversation considering that all of us deal with having to calculate that into the strategies of what we do.
Most of that's me though in New York. So
that's you in New York.
You're
You're the guy that probably led the charge. But the idea of it is that I actually worked it into. This is the first year I worked it into my budget model, where I actually calculated cancellation percentages to get true form cost to true form revenue out of channels.
That's smart.
And I don't know if anybody else has yet, but it's just I just wanted to kind of declutter some of that because it gives this ghost number on top line revenue that definitely doesn't hit anything else because it disappears. So any comments about that, I would love to hear it because it is a problem, a big problem.
Yeah, and I would say, we don't, the types of properties we work with they tend not to be inner city. They tend to be more resort type properties, and we don't get the high cancellation rate that you'd see in a New York. But even with the types of properties we work with, the conversion rate or bounce rate of conversions is all over the place. Depending on ADR, depending on how many the demographic, depending on the location, depending on how many rooms they have. So when you have articles like this, I don't know you can glean a whole lot from the number 90% in and of itself, right? And I think that metric is somewhat of a vanity metric in that it doesn't mean a lot on its own. You've got to kind of look at it in context and look at it as a trend over time. Like if you're optimizing your campaigns, you should be trying to reduce that bounce rate of conversion, and you should be trying to increase the stickiness of the website by making it faster and reducing friction and all that stuff. So I don't particularly like these types of articles because I think it can be to people when they really should just be focused on their specific conversion rate and their specific mousetrap and how can they improve it on a day-to-day basis.
I think, from my perspective, the one thing that is nice about articles like this is at least it gives you a baseline, because if somebody were to look at their own web stats and see a 90% abandonment rate, they may, really think that something's wrong. So it's always nice to have a benchmark number, to compare against.
Yeah, but it can be misleading though, right? Because if mine's 80%, I might be like, wow, I'm kicking everyone's ass. Yeah. But then if I look at the guy next door to me in the same market, he might be at 70%. So,
But I think that, the interesting point of the article, and they did at least make this clear, is that there's a lot more travel research happening these days. And so, for example, I was just staying up at a local resort here, Castle Hot Springs, last weekend for a little getaway. And they have... on their website, they have a lot of information because it's an all-inclusive resort. And so obviously I wanted to kind of plan out what I was going to do, get an idea of what was going to be on the menu, things like that. And so I spent quite a bit of time on their website. Because I'm a busy person, I went 3 or 4 different times to look at it. Mm-hmm. All of those visits, which by the way, I've already booked with the hotel at this point, all of those are counting into their abandonment rate. So it's not always necessarily that there's something wrong, which is why I always encourage people as well to see how much time, what pages are they landing on and how much time are they spending, because you can start to separate out the research from, if they go to the offers page and then they're bouncing, that may be more interesting for you to look at than if they're looking at, the restaurant menu or something along those lines that may indicate travel research.
Yeah,
This
I
is
would
a
agree with that.
frustration for me at doing the branded hotels. Like that data is not readily available. Like you really have to dive into the PMS reports to be able to do that, and you can't really match it up. You can't match up your PMS data with your web data to identify the trends. To be able to say, is there a specific market or segment or whatever that's affecting these cancellation rates? So it's certainly a disconnect in the branded space.
Yeah, it still never, ceases to amaze me how much data people are willing to give up to be part of a brand. I know we talked about that a little bit last week, that it's really just the new OTA where you no longer own the customer, especially if you do a merger and acquisition. But it baffles me how brands can get away with not sharing this type of information with their hotels.
A bit of a legit housekeeping. I wouldn't say no housekeeping, but you got a fan following
Yeah.
Kat on LinkedIn right now, and I can't answer him fast. I was like, she'll say hi in a little bit. Anyway, Lily, you also had some people commenting to you on LinkedIn. I guess what it is from a point of view that when we join into the show, I mean, I'm still getting used to this new formatting on this, that we can share it when we have the opportunity on our own LinkedIn.